I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I am honored to have back with me someone who is a very dear friend and someone who is a very, very dear friend of every person who cherishes freedom and liberty. Former Assistant Secretary of State, Bob Destro. For those of you not familiar with Bob, he was the, as I mentioned, former Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in the Trump 1.0 administration. He is also a law professor at the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law, and he is a constitutional scholar and expert. It's my honor to have back with us Bob Destro. Bob, welcome back.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Bob. So let's give us your take. So you got two hats. We're going to alternate between the two. Constitutional scholar, law professor, and former Assistant Secretary of State, who's still very involved on an international level. Give us your take of the what's been described as the golden age of America, what this means domestically going forward, and internationally going forward?
Well, I mean that's an interesting question. Golden age. Now, I used to think when I was younger that being on the cutting edge of something, was a really cool place to be. And the answer is that actually it's more like a moonscape. You're trying to figure out, like Lewis and Clark, here's a river. What do we do to get across it? And being in a golden age is a little bit like that. I mean, the golden age when we built the railroads, when we conquered, we built dams, we did all the really big stuff. Well, that was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And as the president pointed out when he talked about the building of the Panama Canal, a lot of people died. And so when you're breaking new paths or breaking new ground, there's always going to be a period of adjustment. Okay, so when we say we're on the verge of a golden age, it's that verge part. It's the transition part. And I think that President Trump has accurately pointed out that this is a transition time. And I have to tell you, the reaction to Vice President Vance's speeches in both Madrid, in which he talked about AI, and in Munich, has certainly made people in Europe's heads blow up. And my friends in India, are trying to figure out, well, what does it all mean for us? And so I think, yes, we're on the verge of a golden age, but there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done before we get there.
So let's start domestically. President Trump has empowered this Doge group, Department of Government Efficiency, and they have been dissecting an issue that you've always spoken about, the money flow. Bob Destro,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, will always be known as the person in government who has been most adamant about, you want to know where things are going? You got to follow the money, because that'll tell you where we've been in the past and where we're going. Follow the money. Well, this follow the money, there were a lot of people, I don't think, Bob, I think there were a lot of folks that were not very enchanted with Bob Destro and his follow the money. And we'll talk in a little later down the line about a hearing my birthday from last year, June 4th, 2024, in which you went in front of Congress. And where Bob, what you were talking about in June of 2024, we're seeing Elon Musk talk about it in February, March, and in the ensuing months coming ahead. What was amazing about your testimony on many fronts, but one of which was there's this guy sitting next to you who was also the former Assistant Secretary of State, I believe one of your predecessors, who,
Tom Malinowski.
This is me saying this, not Bob, was one of the most arrogant, condescending, and that it's going pretty far to say that based on the folks I've come in contact with, and how you held your composure with the spewing of this guy was amazing because he essentially was absolutely cool with everything of all these expenditures and claiming he liked transparency when in fact he loved smoke and mirrors. It was absolutely incredible watching this. So this, with this golden age of America has come Doge and this dissection. Now, Bob, let's put your legal hat on, your professor hat on. We've seen blockage on many fronts by the judiciary at the district court level, and in some cases appeals court level, of essentially blocking this transition, this transition from a government-centered economy to essentially what President Trump has talked about and Bessent has talked about, Secretary of Justice, a private sector economy. So, Bob, give us your take about many. As a layman, I'm concerned about the constitutionality from the judicial branch telling the executive branch, separation of powers, what they can and can't do on the executive side as far as the funding side of what they're doing through their agencies. Is my concern off?
No, it's not off. But this is when I said that a transition is a tough place to be.
Yeah.
We're going to get some clarity, I think, on where the dividing lines between executive, judicial, and legislative are. And in this case, the most recent case, which went up to the Supreme Court
Right.
on a temporary restraining order, there's so much that one could talk about that. I'm not going to bore the audience, but the question is, did the United States government agree in a contract to pay a certain amount of money by a certain date? Nobody questions that.
Right.
The question is whether or not any federal district court has the authority to order the payment of money, in the context in which they did. It was whether or not you called it a temporary restraining order or an injunction. You can't. I teach remedies, among other things. You can't get an injunction to pay money. That's just, you have to sue in contract. And that's the wrong court. That was what Justice Alito was talking about a court that doesn't have jurisdiction. So we don't know, because I haven't had time really to go into the court documents and look at what they're actually saying, is if there's money due and owing right now, then of course it has to be paid. If there's a debate over whether or not we owe you the money, then you can't pay it. That's what Alito was worried about in terms of we're going to lose the money. Mm-hmm. And so and I think Justice Barrett, who's gotten a lot of criticism for what she did, I mean, she's a stickler for procedure. And temporary restraining orders are technically not appealable. Uh-huh. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals just let it expire by its own terms. So there was nothing to enforce by the time it got to the Supreme Court. And so what you have is this, if you're looking at the context, not so much the words, you're seeing this titanic battle shaping up over exactly the questions you asked. This is like, who's in charge of money? Mm-hmm. Is it Congress? Is it the executive, or is it the courts? Mm-hmm. And really the courts don't have a dog in that race. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is that there is a procedure for getting money. It's called the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. Mm-hmm. Anybody else, if you claim that the government didn't pay you on a contract, you have to go to the Court of Claims to file it. Federal district courts don't usually have jurisdiction to deal with those cases. But these are really more boundaries of executive power cases, not contract cases.
So when I looked at that decision of the Supreme Court, 5-4 decision, they what appeared to be, they were focusing on also the fact that this is work that's already been done, as opposed to, well, are you planning on doing this work or for future expenditures? So a lot of folks took this as the Supreme Court was saying, oh, a federal court can absolutely stop any kind of funding across the board, whether it's in the past and they haven't been paid, or it's occurred but they haven't been paid, or currently going on, or expenditures in the future. Did I read that right?
You read it a little bit wrong. And the reason that I say that is that even the five,
Yeah.
you had five, four.
Right.
And I think the best way to read the Alito opinion is let's just intervene on this now and get it over with.
Right. Because it's going to happen again. Yeah.
Right. And, but the majority basically sent it back to the lower court and said, you got to actually tell the government what it's supposed to do. And it is once that gets done, and that's where I say I can't go in.
Right.
I haven't had a chance to go in and actually look at what the order says. But under Rule 65 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which is way down in the weeds beyond which we ought not to go, it basically says you have to be really specific.
And it wasn't.
Pay 123.32. I mean, it's got to be that specific, but it can't be pay what you owe. I mean, so this is where and that's really where I have to hand it to Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts, by requiring procedure to be followed. The problem is if I feel like I'm on the sense of right, I blow everything up.
Right.
And that's what's happening on both sides, unfortunately.
And then what about some of these decisions that said, for example, that even though President Trump gave the green light to Musk and Doge to go into look at Treasury data, right? We had a court at one point say, you can't, wait, no, stop. Now there's been a green light given. But why are the courts even have? And it comes back to our original question: why do they even have a say in this? Because to me, it's just they're playing four corners kind of offense. They're trying to stall out this as long as they can go. Am I reading that wrong?
No, this is exactly right. The courts, as the late. As one of the late Supreme Court justices said, many years ago, Justice Robert Jackson, who was FDR's Attorney General before he went on the Supreme Court, he said, look, the constitutional litigation is power politics by other means. So we need to understand that this is all about power politics. It's all about who's in charge. And the Doge, I thought it was brilliant that they put they repurposed an agency within the executive branch.
United States Digital Services. It was called United States Digital Services, right?
And it was designed to fix the problems for the Obamacare website.
Right.
So it's kind of a great, turnabout. But the fact is that there are basically two kinds of officers in the United States. One is those who get, Senate confirmations, like cabinet secretaries, like I was, and then you have people who are subordinates, and those can be appointed by the president by himself or by a secretary, and so Doge is appointed by the president. So they have the president is in charge of everything in the executive branch. So if he says, go look in the Treasury, then they can look.
Right.
And so the idea, so what's wrong with looking? And this is where this is like a bank examination, where if the bank examiners come in and say, show us your books, and people balk at it, they'll shut the bank down. So the question, you can't look. It's crazy. Why can't you look? Whose records are those? Those are the records of American people. And as I said in my congressional testimony, all that stuff ought to be online.
That's right.
Unless it's classified.
And so while we're talking a little bit about the constitutionality of things, this recently came up. During the Biden administration, there was the rampant use for the Autopen on everything. right? And so the question I have, Bob, and this has been brought up, and you're the constitutional scholar. There are folks that are saying, well, the Autopen appeared to be utilized without Biden in presence there. There are documentations of things being signed, and he was in St. Croix and other places. And the only signature on a document that appeared to be his own was the one in where he stepped away from the re-election campaign in 2024. Everything else was signed by Autopen. So then the question is, all these paroles, all these pardons, all these documents that he supposedly signed, executive orders, are they constitutionally viable, or are they negated because the Autopen was used?
Well, there's a simple question of fact. Did he sign them, or did he authorize them being signed or not? I mean, this is the same problem, by the way, that we have in some courts where judges provide electronic signatures on orders. What we want to know is, did the judge actually sign it, or didn't he? Did the president actually sign it, or actually say, use the Autopen on this one or not? Unfortunately, the only entity with the authority to check into that is Congress. The courts are not going to get into it any more than they allow you to get into the question of who wrote the bulk of that opinion, the judge, the justice, or the law clerk. So Congress could do it in the course of an investigation. It could do it in the course of an impeachment proceeding. So I mean, there are ways you can do it, but it's very, very fact intensive, and there's not a court in the country that would touch it with a 10-foot pole.
So we're dependent on Congress.
Exactly.
Okay, so nothing's going to happen.
Congress only has a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
It only has a limited majority. So the question is, how best should they use their time?
Yeah. Yeah, they won't use it on this.
No.
So
it's a great textbook constitutional law case that will never be filed.
Yeah. So let's turn to the what's domestic but international side, and it turns to your testimony last June, right? Interesting. On June 4th, 2024, Bob Destro was, and members of the panel were talking about USAID.
Correct.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
you were outing you were speaking about a number of these programs, and wait a minute, what are we spending money? What's going on here, right? So, Bob, educate our listeners about that hearing, in which was fascinating to watch. Educate our listeners about the hearing and what was brought up and the ramifications from that hearing, and how it actually really is exactly what we're talking about in 2025.
Well, one thing I should say about a hearing is that the hearing is the end of a really long process. So by the time you have the hearing, you've already done a lot of the homework, so homework beforehand. That hearing basically got started, at least from my perspective, in the fall of 2019. So it's been quite a long time, when I ran into a brick wall trying to find out where the money was going in my own office. And I ask a simple question, like, what are we doing in Hong Kong? I mean, that literally is the question. And to which the answer was, well, sir, that's very confidential. It went downhill from there.
Yeah.
It's like, well, but I signed the checks, don't I? I mean, this is not a security clearance thing. I have a security clearance. And so it really turned into a major fight over access to the money. And so they didn't hesitate to come to you to sign off on it.
No.
But when you wanted to get down to the granular detail and say, what exactly are we doing in country X? And you have to remember that other countries see what we're doing. So it's not only what we say we're doing, but what we're actually spending our money on. So the point of that testimony was to say, look at these examples. These are just examples, and why are we building an atheist network in Nepal? That was the centerpiece.
Yeah, yeah.
And you'll notice that the people say, well, it's not that much money.
Right. No. Well, actually, it was a lot of money.
It was $500,000.
Yeah, right.
For most of us.
Yeah, yeah.
But I can tell you that we've also been funding the deconstruction of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the context of Ukraine. And so the idea, are we involved in breaking up or setting up alternative churches? Yeah, that's a First Amendment problem. But the same thing is true. Look at the $20 billion in gold bars that came out on climate stuff. I mean, so one of the reasons I like the Doge process is that it pulls all that information out and allows us to use it. The problem is there's so much of it. I've been pushing people to say, make it available so that those of us can go out there like they did many years ago when they found the bridge to nowhere in Alaska by looking at the state of Alaska's checkbook. What's this expense for? Right. They said, well, we're building a bridge. Where does it go? Nowhere. Right. And so this is the problem that we have across the federal government. How much money is being spent on DEI? How much money is just wasted? I mean, so there's waste, there's fraud, there's abuse. Those are the three things that people talk about all the time. But there's also the more important question, which is, what's the policy? I mean, what actually is our policy in a certain country? And you can't know that unless you know where the money is.
And what you also pointed out, Bob, is many of these policies were not friendly. We're not seen in a positive light, if I should say, by the populace in that particular country. In fact, it was almost, in many cases, disenfranchising what we were funding. It was not bringing minds together and helping. It was maybe benefiting a particular political entity, but the people were seeing it as something that was not just not helping them, but in fact, in many cases, hurting them. Was I off on that?
No, you're not. I mean, that's why I say that it's not just USAID. I mean, so if we look at an entity called the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which invests in emerging economies. There's a country that with which I've been working that is really committed to bolstering its own sovereignty. I mean, basically, they want to be in charge of their own affairs, and so they're exquisitely worried about these big multinational organizations coming in and telling them how to run their education system. And what we did is we gave them a bunch of money, through MCC, and basically said, turn over your education system. They're like, no, we don't want to do that. Why should we do that? The same thing is true when you look at the money going into Ukraine. Yeah, there's money going in for weapons and all that stuff. But the fact is we pay for everything in Ukraine. I mean, including the police, fire, the public safety people. So when Karen Bass in Los Angeles sent one of her fire trucks to Ukraine, that was part of that deal. I wouldn't be surprised if she got paid, if LA got paid for that by USAID. But the fact is, once it goes there, you never know where it goes.
That's right.
And I can tell you by being involved in it, it's not just where the money goes. It's at every level there's a skim, right? So 2% gets taken off so that by the time some of it gets to the ground, as a friend of mine from Africa said, wow, this is kind of like the dew that never quite hits the grass. They never see it.
They never see it. And what they do see, they don't associate many times, not all, but many times, positive ramifications from it.
Well, they don't even, because they never see the money, they don't know that the American government did anything.
Yeah.
I mean, so we don't even get credit for it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big money laundering aspect to all of this as well. And we're only kind of at the beginning.
Yeah.
Only have the initial fights over how dare you ask for that information. I mean, that's what how dare they look at the payment system? Well, the checkbook doesn't lie.
No.
When you say we found somebody who's 350 years old on Social Security, of course that's a mistake.
Well, I don't know. Wait.
But
Nancy Pelosi's pretty old.
yeah, so, but somebody, what I want to know is somebody cashing that check?
Yeah, that's right.
Because if they are, then we're dealing with criminal fraud.
That's right. So. So one of the things you asked for years was, well, let's just have a computer, an Excel spreadsheet of, okay, Hong Kong, here's how much money, here's how it was, here are the different entities it went to, right? Here was the policy associated with it, right? But Bob, they were acting like you were asking for just the moon, that this is just, they were incredulous. And actually at that hearing, even that guy sitting next to you was like, I don't think that's a good idea, because whenever they get in trouble on trying to give an answer, they always go, as you know, to national security, right? So that guy starts mouthing off, well, it's a national security if you have a system like that. I mean, come on.
It's just, first of all, it's just not true. And if it were national, none of this stuff is classified.
No.
So if we were talking about classified information, and as I said in the hearing, if it's that sensitive,
yeah,
then you should have an assistant secretary sign off on doing it in the first place.
Right.
So who died and left? These are the bureaucrats in charge of this. But I can tell you that Congress is in cahoots with this too.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the, I got dressed down in a big way for some congressional staffers, when I literally tried to get my policy and funding people sitting next to one another so that they could find out. Because I wasn't doing this just because I was curious or because I was a policy voyeur. I was trying to get my own staff to have access to that information.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is that there's a revolving door between Congress, NGOs, think tanks. And so you might call it the NGO industrial complex.
Yeah.
Where it's like, wait a minute. I don't work for you. This is a separation of powers problem. When I have a Senate staffer yelling at me for having the audacity to ask these kinds of questions, it's like, my reaction is, who died and left you in charge? Aren't I in the executive branch? So there's a strong feeling in Congress, and this is what what we call the impoundment question, is can Congress demand that the money be spent? That's a question that the court's eventually going to have to deal with.
Congressional staff are yelling at the Assistant Secretary of State for asking questions.
Correct. Yep.
Is that guy still working as a staffer?
Yeah, he's one of the more powerful people.
Oh.
And so what we need to understand is that in the House and Senate, there's both the policy committees, and then there's appropriations committees. So a lot of money goes out the door because they bypass the policy committee and deal only with the appropriators.
And one of the problems, Bob, you mentioned this, is with these NGOs, is a number of these congressmen and their staffers, they might have relatives, they might have friends that are working for these NGOs, right? And maybe even, this is the time of the kickback, right? I mean, one wonders if maybe one of the reasons why they get so upset with somebody like yourself asking questions that are very reasonable about funding and documentation and transparency, that maybe these people that are barking back and trying to bite back because they have a financial stake in the game as well.
Yeah, I mean, probably, that may happen, but I think the more important piece is that money is the means by which policy is implemented.
Yeah, that's right.
And the implementers under the Constitution is the executive branch.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically that's what earmarks are all about.
Mm-hmm.
They say you must spend the money on a new post office in East Kokomo, Indiana. There's nothing wrong with a new post office, but in the cosmic scheme of things, is that what you need?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that might be a trade-off, for you get my vote on X and you give me a new post office.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just the horse trading that happens in normal politics. My point has been all along is it's not my judgment to decide. As an assistant secretary, it certainly wasn't my judgment. That was the secretary's judgment. That was the president's judgment. My job was to implement policy, from basically the president down to the staff level, and then to report back up about what we're doing. And so transparency is essential to democracy and to representative government. And I sent you, and you can certainly share it with your listeners, the briefing paper that was done in January, and the numbers are pretty shocking. And so if the American public had any idea, they would be really upset. And look, the government of India finally got upset, and they passed a law that said you got to report what these foreign NGOs are doing. Well, we actually have a law just like that, but our NGOs went nuts. Right. It's like it's good for the good. It's either we're for transparency or we're not.
So we had a bit of, let's move to the Oval Office, where we had a bit of a transparent event several Fridays ago, right? When Zelensky blew into town and the whole minerals deal, and we had J.D. Vance and President Trump and Zelensky. And many people saw 10 minutes of that meeting. There was 40 minutes that proceeded before that, which even I think the most diehard of anti-Trump zealots, pro-Ukrainian zealots, would say, wait a minute, in that first 40 minutes, President Trump and J.D. Vance kept coming back to, look, peace, peace. And Zelensky kept saying, essentially, no, no, give me the money, and war goes on, right? Bob, give us, as a diplomat, give us your take of that meeting.
That was an amazing meeting. I think that as a diplomat, the first thing you have to do is make sure your homework's done.
Yeah.
And so, what is Zelensky? Zelensky is actually not the president of Ukraine anymore. His term expired.
Yep, martial law.
He declared martial law. So he's no Democrat.
That's for sure.
The fact is that we have been suffering from sets of cookbooks on how many people have died. I mean, basically, the Russians and the Ukrainians have lost a generation of young people, and the fact is, and I think President Trump and J.D. Vance are correct on this, is that peace is not simply the absence of fighting. It's, as J.D. Vance put it in a speech he gave a couple of weeks ago, the same morning, as a matter of fact, is that the peace, are the conditions in which human flourishing takes place. So that I don't have to worry about politics. I mean, if I'm not worried about politics, if I'm not worried about war, I'm worried about my family, that's peace. And so one of the problems is that if the war stops, the long knives come out for Zelensky because he's got opposition inside. This is true in other places as well, but what really stunned me was the hot mic moment, where in his native language, which is Russian, not Ukrainian,
Mm-hmm.
Zelensky called, he called J.D. Vance an effing son of a bitch,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what the translation actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say, well, wait a minute, if you can't control your emotions, to the point where you're in front of a bunch of hot microphones. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you've got the camera staring you in the face. That to me, he took a calculated risk. And today you have Ukrainian websites asking the question, where's Lee Harvey Oswald when we need him? So I mean, this is a serious, serious problem. I mean, and this is, you can't divorce that from what's going on in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
the JD Vance in Munich.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why it is that the French and the British are so hell bent on putting troops
On the ground.
in. It's like, look, they have wanted, certain people in Europe and certain people here have wanted a war with Russia for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Russia has been about.
Mm-hmm.
And so the very best way to avoid that is to go into business together.
That's right.
Both of you will prosper by collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
And people forget Russia is exactly our neighbor. I mean, we share a common border with them. They made fun of Sarah Palin when she said, "Well, I can see Russia from my house."
It's true.
She couldn't really, but
No,
it was close.
yeah, you're out in the Bering Straits, right? Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the Arctic Ocean is going to be one of the hot spots.
Mm-hmm.
Literally as well as figuratively. As the that whole question of a ship channel around Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Greenland is about. It's about shipping channels.
That's right.
So the question, I think the president's absolutely right. Let's get this war behind us. It should have never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who want a war. I mean, the same thing is true, by the way, in the Middle East. There are people who are itching for a war with Iran, which is like crazy, but so be it.
So, Bob, if you were in the Oval Office with President Trump at this point, he said, Bob, that was really a goat rodeo when he was last here that Friday. And he looks at it and he says, so what's the best way to salvage peace so no more people die in Ukraine? What would you tell him?
Well, I think I would tell him to do exactly what he just did,
Yeah.
which is cut off intelligence, which means that those drones, which are killing a lot of people,
Right.
they cut off Starlink, they cut off the intelligence, and so without that targeting information, which we provide, I might add, which means we're in direct war with Russia, then just cut off the assistance. Now, the piece that doesn't get reported on is cutting off the weapons is one thing.
Yeah.
Cutting off the day-to-day aid to Ukraine for their government, I don't think they've cut that off. Because if you don't have police and fire and the other things, you don't have anything. And so I think that President Trump is gradually ramping up the pressure, saying we got to get things settled. And the Ukrainians are not interested in settling it. They still are, in the world of thinking we can win this if we just get enough money and weapons. My reaction is winning does not mean defeating Russia. A win for everybody is peace.
That's right.
And that's always negotiated. You don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with your enemies.
Which brings me to NATO. Ron Paul recently wrote, suddenly leaving NATO is on the table. So, Bob, is it?
Yeah, I think it is on the table. I think that's the way in which you have to read the J.D. Vance speech. You have to read the J.D. Vance speech in Munich. You have to read it in the AI speech that he gave in
Madrid.
in Madrid.
Hmm.
And why is that? Because in the end, one is about why are we here?
Hmm.
Why are United States troops in Germany? What is and the answer is there's this threat from Russia,
Hmm.
right? We're still in a Cold War mentality. And just like when you give your kids an unlimited checkbook, and I'm not calling them kids by any stretch of the
Right.
imagination,
Yeah, I get it.
you make people dependent on you.
That's right.
In the entire system, then Europe became dependent on the United States for defense. And so there really isn't, the British Army is a joke. The idea that they could defend themselves. I mean, when they really need to be defending themselves against China. So
Hmm.
I mean, this is a serious problem across the board. The Europeans have become far more too dependent. Let them develop their own military.
Hmm.
And the question of NATO looking for things to do outside of the North Atlantic, putting NATO in Southeast Asia makes no sense at all.
No. So Michael Schellenberger, a political commentator, recently wrote the following: America, I want your take on this. Americans can no longer tolerate European entitlement. Let me start out by saying I love Europe. But you Europeans do not respect Americans. You can protest and say, no, no, we love America, but no, you don't. We know you look down on us, you think you're better than us, and in some ways you are. You work 35 hours a week, you have longer vacations, you've got this magnificent culture, we get it. But any relationship in which one side doesn't respect the other can't last. It's this thing where Ukraine comes to the White House and acts like it can tell us what we should do. This thing where somehow we're on the hook, including for countries that are not in NATO. That was never the deal. Ukraine is not a part of NATO, and we were never obligated to protect Ukraine. We have no NATO agreement with Ukraine. And this thing where Zelensky then goes and quotes all these other European leaders, they're with me, not with the United States. Great. Well, then go work together. This is a dysfunctional relationship and it needs to end and it needs to change. So it's time to grow up. It's time for the relationship to change, and that includes with NATO. Your take?
I think he's largely right. I mean, I think the danger is that and I've had conversations with friends who are European diplomats, and they say, well, should we dig in and oppose Trump? And of course, my initial reaction was, you're diplomats. Why don't you try some diplomacy?
Right.
This is the idea. Why is confrontation? This is kind of a left thing. Let's resist. Well, when you say let's resist, I've got to put together a program to help people in South Asia,
Uh-huh.
understand. One of the things they want to know how do you explain Trump? I said, I can't explain Trump. Read his book, The Art of the Deal.
Right.
That is going to be as good an explanation as you're going to see. I said, but what you don't, but they also want an understanding of Trumpism. I said, well, that's not about Trump. In fact, there's no such thing. That's about the American people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the map and you see what the electoral math was, that basically this is a fight between the big blue cities and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the immigration view should be looked in that way. The involvement in foreign wars should be looked at that way, because who are the people who go fight in those wars? They're the people from rural America who still join the army.
Mm-hmm.
So the Trump voters are, it's the old movie, I'm sick and tired of it, I'm not going to take it anymore.
That's right. Network.
So this question of, look, we understand. I mean, we lived in Poland for a while, and we understand that memories are long.
Mm-hmm.
The Balkans, memories are long. If you talk to people in the Balkans, who are they worried about? They're not worried about the Russians. They're worried about the Turks.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's a history here, and we can't fix that history.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first, as my friends in India asked me several months ago, what does he mean by America first? It says it's exactly what the flight attendant tells you when you get on an airplane. Put your own face mask on first, and then help the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Finally, Bob, the Department of Justice was tasked through some executive orders to release files on RFK, JFK, MLK, Epstein. And President Trump signed executive order to that degree January 20th, within a couple hours of him being inaugurated. So we're coming up on a couple months, and haven't seen anything. And the one that's come to most prominence is the Epstein files, right? The files were reportedly delivered to Pam Bondi. About 8 days later, she goes on a Jesse Waters show and Fox and says, "Oh, well, we're going to release them tomorrow. And oh, they're terrible. There's a lot of bad stuff." And usually my recollection is whenever they're going to do something big through the Department of Justice, they hold a press conference at the Department of Justice. Well, what happened here was they handed out some notebooks to some, quote, influencers that were Epstein files, phase one, which were essentially, some of which were redacted, and most of which, all of which actually, had previously been released before. It was old news, nothing new. And then it comes out where she says, well, I had 200 documents, 200 pages. Well, Bob, look, I'm not Attorney General. I'm not an attorney. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. On the other hand, if somebody told me they were bringing me the Epstein files and they handed me 200 pieces of paper, I'd go, what, are you kidding me? You think I just fell off the truck? This guy's been on trial God knows how many times. There's God knows how much intel on this guy, and you're giving me 200 pages? No, maybe 200,000. So, Bob, what's the holdup here?
Well, there's two answers to the question. The first holdup is exactly what I just described to you about the money.
Yeah.
It's like they don't want you to see the files. That's all. And it's kind of a who died and left you in charge. Well, I happen to be the president, right? That's what Trump is saying.
Right.
I happen to be the president. Those are my files.
Yep.
Now, notice, and I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction now. That whole fight over the classified files where they indicted Trump is part of this problem. It's like the idea is that the president himself is the only person in the entire government with absolute authority to classify and declassify. Everybody works for him. And so the idea that you can indict a president, because he took files with him is crazy. But the point is that they want the bureaucracy to be the keeper of the keys. Mm-hmm. Now, there's another piece to this that I've never seen anybody comment on, which is one of the great things, the things that make the Epstein files so salacious is who was on that plane.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just about we know what happened to Epstein, or we think we know what happened to Epstein. Right. But if we're talking about criminal behavior, that is being covered up, releasing those files may well be unethical, because if there's criminal behavior in there, then maybe they ought to be taking things to a grand jury. Now, if the statute of limitations is run, I understand all that, but you just can't dump a bunch of files of more recent vintage. The Kennedy files, the Martin Luther King files, those are old files. Nobody, almost everybody's dead. So you don't have to worry about that. But I do, as somebody who teaches legal ethics, I do worry about the fact that if I was on that plane, and I was not, but if I were, then everybody's going to say, well, he's guilty of something. Mm-hmm. And the burden of proof falls on me to prove that I wasn't. And that's just, the Justice Department needs to be thinking about that kind of stuff.
And could it also be that my contention has always been Epstein was a front for much larger entities, and it
Oh,
was
I agree.
right, and the larger entities being the intel agencies, not
Yeah,
just the CIA, but we're talking other countries' agencies, and that could it be that Bondi's getting visits from not the director of the CIA, not Radcliffe, but bureaucrats, like kind of like that Senate staffer that was yelling at my friend Bob about asking for transparency. That these bureaucrats show up and say you're not doing this. Could that be another part of this?
yes, I think it's definitely, you've heard the phrase sources and methods.
Yeah.
You know, that is, Epstein is going to expose some of the sources and methods. And look, we know the 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 British, the GCHQ, know that other countries besides Russia
Mm-hmm.
have been interfering in our politics for a long time. That's part of this. And as far as I can tell, it's probably ongoing. It's not just Epstein. Epstein is a celebrated case, but I think if we really look carefully, we would see that foreign governments have got their fingers in our politics on many levels, and it's not just China.
No, it's not. Well, I mean, China's obviously doing it, but one of the reasons why everybody points at China, right, is that way you don't have to point at the other folks, right?
Well, yeah.
Some of whom some people say, oh, well, they're our allies, right? Well, wait a minute. Well, they're our allies, but wait a minute. What are our allies doing here, right?
Well, but this is let's come back to USAID. I mean, when the United States government is putting money into another country that's designed to destabilize them, I mean, when Victoria Nuland shows up in your country, you
Run.
better be, you better run. So I mean, look, the fact that everybody does it doesn't make it right. And so this question, do I want to see the files released? Of course I do. But I also want to make sure that when they are released, we're not forcing people to defend themselves, against a presumption of guilt.
So if that's the case, Bob, if you're Pam Bondi, why aren't you going to a grand jury with the open and shut stuff?
She may be. I mean, the whole point of grand jury is that it's secret.
Yeah.
And so, we shouldn't know if she's doing that. I mean,
but it still would be. Could she still say she does a lot of interviews? I mean,
right.
if you ask Pam Bondi, what's the 5 things you did this week? Interview with Hannity, interview with Maria, interview with Jesse Waters, interview. She does a lot of interviews. I mean, could she say in these interviews, we're going through the files and we've really come across some really bad stuff. So what we're doing is we're actually, and I cannot be specific about this at this point, but we are taking the necessary steps to hold people accountable through the current system we have in our country related, again, to justice. I mean, if she said something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to script it for her.
No, but
but to say we're investigating, as we should, as we're obligated to do,
mm-hmm.
Any violations of criminal law that we see in those files.
Mm-hmm.
That's enough. I mean, under the rules of professional conduct, prosecutors aren't supposed to say much.
Mm-hmm. So, do you believe the Epstein files will see the light of day in the end?
I wouldn't bet the family farm on it.
You have a better feeling toward JFK, RFK, MLK files because of them being 60 years old plus in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen other cases in which there's clearly cover-ups being done
mm-hmm.
to hide certain things. So you never know exactly how these things are going to go. So even if they're authorized to be released, it's possible that the staff is going to lose things.
Yeah. In addition to the redactions.
Yeah. Right.
Well, Bob, you've been very generous with your time. Educate our listeners on how they can follow you on a regular basis.
Well, we're in the process well, you can find me at Catholic University's Law School, law.edu, under faculty experts. We're in the process of, my friend Harold Bradley and I are in the process of setting up a Substack called, Plotting the Dots.
Oh, that's good.
He's been more active on it than I have, but I will be shortly. And, I really enjoyed talking to you. So thanks for having me.
Well, I thank you, Bob, for everything you have done, are doing, and will do, and I look forward to your ongoing, very positive impact on every American, every person of the world. You are an incredible class act who is incredibly honest, and our country has been well served by you, and I look forward to your continued service to our country. And I thank you folks for joining us. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.